Have you heard that glucose is our primary energy source? Have you heard that it's our preferred energy source as well? Yeah, I'm sure that you probably have, especially if you've watched this channel long enough because of the people that I react to. We're going to be clearing this up today once and for all in a very concise video exclusively about this topic. I have always responded to this with two things depending on what is said, which word is used, whether it be preferred, which is one word, okay, or primary. Those are not synonyms. Those are two different words with two different meanings. So let's start with the first one. Glucose is your preferred energy source. So there's a few responses to this that I'll give. Number one, let's address the word preferred. The body does not have a preference for substrate because preference requires a consciousness. And our body does not have a consciousness. We have a consciousness, but that's not part of our chemistry, our actual material chemistry in our bodies, which is actually responsible for which substrate, fatty acids, ketone bodies, glucose, pyruvate, whatever it may be, is actually utilized, okay, for the purpose of creating ATP. All right. What this means is that when people are saying preferred, there is no basis for that, and that is their opinion. Okay. Usually when people say it's their preferred fuel source, is what they are saying is that, well, the body will use it first or it will prioritize it. In the presence of both substrates, one, glucose, will be used before fat. Well, okay, let's think about it this way. Alcohol is often used first as well, not because it's specifically poisonous or toxic. This is another problem because the body can't recognize something to be toxic. Okay, it's not recognizing something as toxic. Things just happen in the body, and it's up for a human being to make the inference that, oh, perhaps the body has evolved to basically clear this substrate out over other substrates when they're both present in equal concentrations or equal amounts, because it has a negative impact on the body. It actually is deleterious to the body in some way. Okay, that's different than saying the body recognizes it as toxic and freaks out and expels it from the body. That's not what's going on. There were pressures exerted on the body that caused it to develop mechanisms for it to excrete the substrate if it in and of itself is toxic, or above a certain concentration is toxic. And then at that concentration, it will start excreting the substrate. Okay, that is what happens with alcohol. Alcohol enters cells passively. Its metabolism is not inhibited by other substrates being used in a cell, unlike fatty acids and glucose. Those processes are inhibited depending on, which one is being oxidized more than the other. Okay, alcohol's not that way, so that also helps with metabolizing it faster, etc., etc. So basically what I'm saying, the reason I even bring up alcohol in the first place, is because if you were to say that glucose is used first, well, so is alcohol, and we know that alcohol is not a preferred fuel source by the body, quote unquote. In other words, indicated to be consuming as a primary energy source, quote unquote. Okay, so that argument is ridiculous. Okay, so there's no evidence of this. That is your opinion, okay? If you actually want to determine what the body is most propitious towards using, what you would have to do is examine someone's genotypic maximum capacity for the metabolism of, well, fatty acids, alcohol, glucose, etc., aerobically speaking, all right? And the way that you would do that is by getting people to basically be consuming solely carbohydrates and no fat with protein, okay? So controlling for the rest of the diet, adequate protein, adequate whatever, and then examining the same people, but switching out the glucose for fat, and then doing the same thing with alcohol, etc., etc. Observing their presentation over the course of however long the study goes on for, which is also an important factor to take into consideration here. And also how the ratio of, for example, GLUT transporters and CD36 transporters alter in each situation, and then determining, okay, well, if the glucose group still has higher CD36 and catabolic enzymes in their liver, for example, compared to GLUT transporters and anabolic enzymes, well, it seems like their genotypic maximum is set to be more propitious towards oxidizing fat, and having fat be the indicated source of fuel. Okay? That's how this works. All right? That's the only way that you could even remotely be as forgiving as possible when it comes to the argument of preferred fuel source. But this experiment isn't done. It's not done. Okay? So that's the first problem with this whole glucose is your preferred fuel source or your preferred source of energy. Okay? The second problem with this, glucose, fat, ketones, etc., they are not sources of energy. Your body does not convert substrates to energy. It uses them to create energy. Okay, two different things. Okay, if it converted them into energy, poof, energy, there would be no need to excrete carbon dioxide from the lungs. As we're doing right now, okay? So that's the other problem. Now, what if someone says primary fuel source instead of preferred? Well, now we're talking about something different, okay? Now we're talking about what is primarily used by the body. My response to this is, well, that depends on what you're eating. Glucose is your primary energy source, and again, with the energy source thing, is your primary source of fuel, okay, that your body uses to create ATP if you are primarily consuming glucose. Obviously. So no, it depends. When you say, oh, glucose is your primary energy source, well, whose? Mine? Because no. It's not. Fat is my primary fuel source. So same thing here, okay? But this leads into a different discussion here. People will say that glucose is essential for bodily functions. You need it for survival. Yes, of course you do. If you don't have glucose, you die. If you don't have glycogen in your muscles, you will succumb to irreversible rigor. Not rigor mortis, but I mean, effectively it will be, because you're going to die, okay? Your muscles will not be able to relax. You will not be able to breathe. You will die without glycogen, okay? But we can get into this discussion about, oh, well, gluconeogenesis, though, and all this stuff, which are valid. They're absolutely valid, okay? But there's something that I really need to elaborate in a video on its own here, which is the second part of this glucose discussion, which is how is glucose actually required in the body? Because people don't understand this. Glucose is required solely for anaerobic processes in the body. What does that mean? It means that there's no requirement for any cell to oxidize glucose. In other words, use it to create energy in the mitochondria. There is zero requirement for this. Okay? A lot of people don't know that. Okay? The mitochondria in your body, and all of the cells of your body, require either fatty acids, ketone bodies, or pyruvate, which is the glucose derivative. Okay, so effectively, if you want to simplify it, glucose. You can say glucose, okay? Or alcohol, really. It needs any of those to create ATP. It doesn't require pyruvate. It doesn't require fatty acids. It requires either of those, okay? Now, this gets a little more nuanced when you think, okay, Eddie, the mitochondria might not need the pyruvate for oxidative purposes, fine, okay. However, in order for a substrate to even arrive at the mitochondria, the cell needs to take it up. So what are the cells most propitious towards sequestering from the bloodstream? Is it fatty acids primarily? And is that the case for every cell? Some cells are different. Is it glucose primarily to create pyruvate? Is it ketone bodies? This is where we get into the discussion that I just said in part 1 of this video, in the beginning. You would have to experiment on what is the genotypic maximum for anabolism, so anabolic processes like fatty acid synthesis, triglyceride synthesis, glycogenesis, all these processes that basically imply that glucose would be our, indicated fuel source on a biochemical basis. And you would also have to do this in the catabolic sense as well, depending on the context of the diet. Okay? It turns out that human beings that are eating a standard American diet, which is primarily carbohydrate based, even in the fed state, when they have extremely high insulin, still have a ratio in their liver of catabolic to anabolic enzymes that is very high, that indicates that the body is most propitious towards catabolic processes. Ketogenesis, gluconeogenesis, okay? The efficiency for gluconeogenesis in our bodies is very high, okay? Our cells still have a higher expression of enzymes involved in fatty acid oxidation, for example. So all of these things point in the direction of we are creatures that are ketogenic naturally. We are designed to have a ketogenic diet, okay? So this is ridiculous, all right? What that means is that glucose is not an indicated fuel source for the body, specifically with regard to aerobic processes, okay? So how is glucose actually required? I keep saying, well, anaerobically. Well, what does that mean? Well, to put it very simply, your body requires glucose in primarily 4 cells, okay? Through 2 different processes. Your body requires glucose in muscle cells, okay? Through a process called glycogenolysis, all right? If we did not have glycogenolysis, our muscle fibers would not fire at all, despite what ChatGPT may have you believe, okay? Your brain requires it in specific types of brain cells, not neurons, but astrocytes, okay? Through a process called glycogenolysis, okay? The liver requires it, not for its own processes, but through a process called glycogenolysis to provide the blood with more glucose during times of extreme stress, such as exercise, or during times of fasting, which doesn't indicate that fasting is stressful per se. It depends on the length of the fast, okay? But anyway, yes, your liver has to have a certain amount of glycogen, but not for its own processes, for the process of supplying it to the bloodstream. So arguably, you could say that the liver doesn't even really require glucose at all, because it doesn't require glucose for its own processes. But I'll be giving the benefit of the doubt here. I'll be giving more grace here, okay? And finally, erythrocytes, a type of blood cell, a type of red blood cell, through a process called glycolysis. Erythrocytes don't have mitochondria, and therefore they do not use glycogenolysis, okay? They use glycolysis, and therefore they use a lot of glucose, actually, because 1 molecule of glucose through glycolysis produces only 2 ATP, 2. It's why cancer cells that also only use glycolysis use so much glucose and are so energy demanding, substrate demanding, because they can only produce 2 ATP per molecule of glucose. So what this means is that anybody telling you that you should be consuming lots of glucose every single day, lots of carbohydrates, is lying to you. Well, they're not really lying to you, because lying involves malice aforethought. They're just imbecilic, and they don't understand human physiology. They don't understand human physiology. They really don't. Oh, well, your muscles need glucose. Well, yes, or else they wouldn't be firing right now, okay? This little finger here, it wouldn't be moving. My mouth wouldn't be moving, okay? I'd look a lot like this, okay? And I'd die, all right? No need for rigor mortis. It would just be rigor is my cause of death, okay? That's what happens. Because your muscle fibers would twitch, and then there would be no glycogen left in your scenario for them to fill back up for the next muscle twitch. So they would just be pulled. They would just be taut, and then I would die because I wouldn't be able to breathe, okay? That's what we're talking about here. So, yes, your muscles require glucose, of course. But not only do they require glucose that I'm deriving, okay, from gluconeogenesis, they also use fat and ketones in a different part of the cell at the same damn time, okay? So that gets into muscle energetics. I'm not going to go into that right now. That's a story for another day. So anyway, I had to make this video because this idea, oh, glucose is your preferred energy source. Bro, carbs are energy. But carbs are energy? Carbs are not energy. They're mass units that can be used to create energy. Fat can also be used to create energy. So how do you determine which one ought to be consumed? Well, what are our genes most propitious towards using? Okay, and that's when we get into the situation. Even in people that eat primarily carbohydrates and are primarily eating an anabolic style diet, they still have a physiology that is more catabolic than anabolic. They do. Sorry, even after maximum phenotypic adaptation to a carbohydrate-rich diet, even in a standard American, you can see this. Their ratio in their liver of catabolic to anabolic enzymes is still high, okay? Sorry. That's just how it is. It's not, the opposite is not true, okay? If someone eats a highly catabolic style diet, a ketogenic diet, where they're eating a meat-based, very low carbohydrate diet, it's not like their anabolic to catabolic enzyme ratio is super high. In fact, the catabolic to anabolic ratio goes even higher, showing that our ability to phenotypically adapt to that diet is extremely high, okay? Or else I'd be dead. Carbohydrates are not required because of our efficiency for gluconeogenesis, and they are not required in any aerobic process in the body whatsoever under any circumstances. Okay, we're done. We're done! So, share this video with your friends and family who believe that carbohydrates are required for human consumption, that you need carbs for energy, bro. And yeah. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts about this in the comment section below as well. Did you know any of this? Did you have a feeling about any of this being true? And also, buy my book, Contraindicated, as well, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you have not bought that book already, paperback, hardcover, and audio book versions are in the description below. I finally, by the way, found a way to start making a reflowable ebook, and I can do so very, very quickly now. So the ebook is still underway. In fact, things are looking very good in that department. And also, subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already, as well, to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, and an exclusive Discord server. And with that being said, let's just keep it short. Join me next time when we're either monologuing about something that needs to be cleared up because of inane, inadequate morons with respect to their intellectual capacity, saying things that they don't understand, or reacting to those people and whatever, reacting to a study, whatever it may be. So, till then.